Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Tonight we're beginning at Daniel chapter 11 and verse 36 and going through the end of the book of Daniel to chapter 12, verse 13. So this is our last lesson in Daniel. And it may not be surprising that our last lesson in Daniel is also one of the controversial passages in Daniel that there's a lot of debate about. We have a lot of debate about chapter 2. There's a lot of debate about the 70 weeks in chapter 9. And there's a lot of debate about chapter 7 and who the little horn is. And so 2, 7, and 9 are the kind of the places where there's a struggle to understand, and there are multiple options in the history of Christianity, but also in the history of Judaism. There are multiple options. And chapter 11, beginning at verse 36, is another one of those where there's multiple options of understanding. Now, last week, we noticed that in chapter 10, verse 1 to chapter 11, verse 35, there was kind of a consensus understanding. Everybody kind of agreed on this. Almost everyone agrees, except for somebody here in our group. Almost everyone agrees that in chapter 11 specifically, Daniel is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, who ruled Palestine or Judea at the time and entered the temple, desecrated the temple, stopped the sacrifices in the temple for 3.5 years. There were no sacrifices in the temple until there was a rebellion by the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt, that then restored the temple and inaugurated a 100-year or more independence of Judea, right? So he had a little kingdom of Judea for a while there, for about 100 years, until the Romans came and subjugated it and put it under made it one of their provinces and so on. But everybody agrees that Antiochus is the main character there especially from chapter 11, verse 21 through verse 35. So when we come to verse 36, where it says, the king shall act as he pleases. What king? Who are we talking about? The king shall act as he pleases. And in fact, the first word is a verb, to act. He will act. And then it gives the subject at the end of this sentence, at least the end of the sentence in English, the king. So who's the he? The king, huh? Well, we don't know. Well, that's one of the points. All right. So who's the king? Is it the king of the north, which would be Antiochus? Because if you go back up to verse 32, for example, he shall seduce with intrigue those who violate the covenant. But the people who are loyal to their God shall stand firm and take action. In other words, they'll ultimately revolt, or they're going to resist what Antiochus is doing. But in verse 32, he shall seduce is Antiochus. But when you come to verse 36 and it says, the king shall act as he pleases, is that still Antiochus or is that somebody else? Now, there are 3 views, generally speaking. There's all kinds of continuum there, different variations, and which tells us, at least to me, nobody really knows. We're just trying to figure this out. The first view is that the king, in verse 36, is Antiochus. He had printed on his coins, King Antiochus. And he had printed on his coins, him representing himself as deity, which fits the description. Another view is to say, no, here he shifted from the Hellenistic or Greek context to a Roman context. That is, he, the king shall, is thinking about Roman emperors. Now, the problem with that is the text doesn't indicate that there's been a change in subject. It doesn't say now later on, or it doesn't say and another king or a different king. The language doesn't really suit, at least prima facie, on the surface of it, doesn't suit a kind of change in subject, change in person. But some suggest, no, we've shifted to the Roman Empire here. Or at least we shift to the Roman Empire in verse 40. Some translations actually put a different paragraph heading there. They separate the two sections with a subheading, as if you're not supposed to think of these two as the same thing. So some think, well, the Roman emperor, while Antiochus is verses 36 to 39, it's about Rome in verses 40 and following. But then the third view is all this is way future, at least to Daniel, it's way future. Some would suggest it's around the bend for us, that this king is about to show up, that this king maybe is already at work in some ways. But it's the Antichrist, to use the language of the New Testament. Now, Old Testament doesn't have that language, Antichrist. That's not in Israel's Hebrew vocabulary. It's a Greek word. But we know it as, we know that Antichrist by other names like the man of lawlessness or the beast of Revelation. Those are two people who are interpreted as the Antichrist, not just Antichrist, plural, like there are a lot of little Antichrists, right? All through history, you've had Antichrist. But are we awaiting the Antichrist, the one who's going to be the epitome of evil, who's going to represent evil in all of its glory, right? And be the one who is the final last gasp of the satanic powers in the world. This is going to be Satan's last stab at controlling the world, right? And some think that's who he's talking about. Some think beginning in verse 40, some think beginning in verse 36. That's a difficult decision to make. One of the things going for kind of at the end of time is this language of resurrection in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Or the language of the end. The end. That seems to make it like, okay, that's talking about the end of the age or the end of the future kind of thing. Although the end could refer to the end of the persecution, whatever persecution he's talking about. So I don't want to spend our time kind of, well, here are the 10 reasons why this one, or here are the 10 reasons why this one, or here, I don't want to spend our time doing that. What I'd like to do is just, let's read it and then just talk about it in general. What's being described? Maybe not necessarily, who exactly is he talking about, but what sort of thing is he talking about? Right? Because I think that's important for the ending of Daniel. Because when we get to verse 5, we get kind of the ending of Daniel. It gets wrapped up. And that's where I'd really like us to focus tonight. But let's read through beginning in verse 36. Daniel 11, verse 36. The king shall act as he pleases. He shall exalt himself and consider himself greater than any god, and shall speak horrendous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper until the period of wrath is completed. For what is determined shall be done. He shall pay no respect to the gods of his ancestors or to the one beloved by women. He shall pay no respect to any other god, for he shall consider himself greater than all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his ancestors did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses by the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall make more wealthy, and shall appoint them as rulers over many, and shall distribute the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. He shall advance against the countries and pass through like a flood. He shall come into the beautiful land, which is Israel, and tens of thousands shall fall victim, but Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites shall escape from his power. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow in his train. But reports from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to bring ruin and complete destruction to many. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. At that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. There shall be a time of anguish, such as never occurred since nations first came into existence. But at that time, your people will be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep the words secret and the book sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be running back and forth, and evil shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and two others appeared, one standing on this bank of the stream and one on the other. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was upstream, "How long shall it be until the end of these wonders?" The man clothed in linen, who was upstream, raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by the one who lives forever that it would be for a time, 2 times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be accomplished. I heard, but could not understand. So I said, "My Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" He said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words shall remain secret and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified, cleansed, and refined, but the wicked shall continue to act wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Happy are those who persevere and obtain the 1,335 days. But you go your way and rest. You shall rise for your reward at the end of the days." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now it's kind of confusing. All right, let's pay attention to that word end. Did you notice that? Several times, like right there in verse 13, end. Or if you go up to verse 9 in chapter 12, the time of the end. Or in verse 6, until the end of these wonders. Or in verse 4, until the time of the end. Or at that time, Daniel 12:1. In verse 45, he shall come to his end. Chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 40, at the time of the end. Or chapter 11, verse 36, it's said a little bit differently. The period of wrath is completed. All right, now, here's why you get different views. Because some say, well, the end. He's talking about the end. Well, the end is the end. Right? It's the final thing. It's what happens before we all go to the new heaven and new earth. Right? That's the end. I'm not so sure. Because if you look at that language, the period of wrath is completed. In other words, the end is the end of the period of wrath. It's the end of the persecution. It's the end of the cessation of sacrifices. It's the end of the abomination and desolation. Now, again, when does that happen? If you put it into the future, some would say that's the Great Tribulation period, the 7 years. There's 7 years of tribulation, and 3.5 is about the middle of that tribulation. I'm more inclined to think he's really talking about the end of the persecution of the Jewish people by Antiochus. That's what I'm inclined to think. I can be totally wrong. Wouldn't surprise me if I was wrong, at all. But I'm inclined to think that way. So let's go back up to verses 36 to 39. What did you see there? What do you see there that stands out to you in terms of what this person does? This king, in verse 36, the king does as he pleases.
He thinks he's God.
He thinks he's God. He's acting like God. Right? He thinks he's God. He has some kind of divine aura about him. Presents himself that way or acts that way. Right? Okay. What else do we see? He plays favorites, doesn't he? Verse 39.
Yes. People that give him the silver and gold, he'll take care of.
Yeah, okay. He shall make more wealthy, right? He will appoint them as rulers. And so if you think about Antiochus, the Jewish people divided. Some of the Jewish people said, okay, let's play this game. Right? We're gonna play along with Antiochus, and we're going to facilitate his power, and we're not going to resist him. We're not going to oppose him. And Antiochus exalts those people, gives them wealth and power, right? But there were others who resisted, and they were martyred, or they had to run to the hills. Anything else? Verses 36 to 39 that you see there? Now, of course, if you think of this as future, you're thinking of some Antichrist global emperor who is doing similar sorts of things, right? But on a more universal scale, not just in a limited way. All right, let's go down to verses 40 to 45. This is in verse 40 at the time of the end. And in verse 45 is that this person shall come to his end. Okay. So this is something that's going to happen as the reign of this king is about to end, or the reign of the Antichrist is about to end, or the reign of Antiochus is about to end. And what kind of picture do you get there? How would you describe this picture that is drawn for us here?
Great battle.
Okay, it's gonna be some battles, right? He's gonna win. He's going to control Egypt, basically. Going to control its wealth and power. Going to control the beautiful land, verse 41. He shall come into the land of Israel, the beautiful land, and thousands are going to die. Yeah.
Back up in the chapter 11, one thing that really caught my eye was 11:32. Says with flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the people who know their God will firmly resist.
Yeah.
But, that really caught my eye because, I keep referring to Romans, but that's exactly what Paul said. You're going to be persecuted, but nothing separates us from God's love.
Right. Romans 8, nothing can separate us from God's love, even in persecution. So as you're pointing out, Pete, in chapter 11, verse 32, you have these two groups of people, right? One group of people who kind of plays along with the ruler, Antiochus in verse 32. And then you have the other people who are faithful to the covenant, and they don't play the game, and they get persecuted for that, right? So, yeah, I mean, and I think you're helpful in pointing out that sort of playing out in the world is not unique to Daniel, right? It's what plays out all along through the history of the world. That there are believers in God who will play along with the culture, play along with the rulers, and receive wealth and power from the rulers. But then there are the faithful who do not, and they suffer for it. And that would be true with Antiochus. It would be true with Rome. It was true with Nazi Germany. It's been true all along. True with Napoleonic wars. I mean, it's been the cycle of the world that evil continues, and it just shows up in different forms. In Hebrews 11, the resistance there, the faithful in Hebrews 11 are people who are under stress, right? They're being persecuted, or they're being chased after, they're being ostracized or whatever. Yeah. No, that's a good point.
If you were to line this up with secular history, it would be the same thing in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's right, Nancy. I mean, it would be that what we're describing here is not unique to Daniel, or not unique to this moment. That what is being described is something that will happen over and over and over again. So that when it does happen in Rome, or when it does happen at the destruction of Jerusalem, Jesus can allude to it and say, yeah, that's sort of like what Daniel was talking about. Or in Revelation, you can use the same language to paint the same picture. You're not necessarily talking about the same thing historically, but you're using the same language to paint that picture, because it's the same battle between good and evil, right? And that's what is important, it seems to me, in Daniel, is that the struggle between good and evil, and how the people of God respond to it. Do they worship the statue, Daniel chapter 3? Do they stop praying to God, or do they suffer the lion's den, Daniel chapter 6? And so the story is still the same here. You're going to have a king, whether it's Antiochus or whether it's Hitler. You're going to have a king who is going to reward those who play his game and persecute those who don't among the people of God. And that's not just something that happened once. It happens over and over and over. Right? And it may happen in a big way at the end. Maybe. I wouldn't discount that, because it's always happening. It's continually happening. So it may happen in some significant way at the end. But I don't think Daniel 11 is talking about that end. You might, you can picture it this way. When you're reading Daniel 11, you're looking at this mountain here in front of you, Antiochus. But when you look at Antiochus and you see the evil that Antiochus is and represents, there's a larger mountain lying behind Antiochus. It's like when if you've driven in Colorado or somewhere like that before, and you start seeing the Rockies and you see those first line of mountains. And as you get closer, what else do you see? The other bigger ones behind it, right? And you see that there's more going on here than just what's in front of you. And I think that's true when we're talking about this cosmic battle of good and evil. We can see what's in front of us. We can see Antiochus here. But if we say, oh, well, it's Antiochus is gone, so this doesn't mean anything anymore. No. Antiochus was just a manifestation of the ongoing struggle. And when we pay close attention to the description of Antiochus, it gives us kind of a way of identifying that evil. That we can see that evil. When someone takes on the prerogative of God, or someone enhances evil by the distribution of wealth, or we see someone who does not honor the people of God, right? Or persecutes the people of God, maybe I'll put it that way. The little horn's raising his head again, right? We're able to see things, and that's part of the benefit of studying Daniel in this situation, is that we can start seeing. Here are some of the signs of the battle that's raging. But this battle will come to an end. Verse 45. This he, whoever that he is in verse 45, he shall come to his end. In other words, the one who persecutes the people of God, who desecrates the temple, is not going to win, right? And that's when we come to chapter 12. And at that time, what time? The time of the end, like in the future? Or is it the time of the end of the persecution at the time of Antiochus or the time of the Romans? Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people. Who's your people? Who would that be? Talking to Daniel, the protector of your people. Yeah, that's Israel, right? So Michael is the angel who protects Israel, who fights for Israel. Right? Remember that cosmic battle that's going on behind the scenes, right? That at that time, Michael will arise. Now, we always got this question, though. Why didn't he get up quicker? Why didn't he get up 7 years ago? Why didn't he get up and prevent Antiochus from even living? Why did Hitler's demise happen in 1945 instead of 1932? I mean, those are always questions we have, right? We got those questions. But the assurance is Michael's going to arise. Michael's going to act. And there shall be a time of anguish, as such has never occurred since nations first came into existence. That's kind of hyperbole. It's going to get as bad as it's ever been. That was said about the destruction of Jerusalem. It's said here about whatever this is talking about. It's been said about the destruction of Jerusalem in Roman period, in Roman time as well. I mean, that's kind of how we describe things that are bad, right? Oh, it's as bad as it's ever been. It's worse now than it's ever been in the history of the world. It's a version of hyperbole, it seems to me. Although some take it as quite literal, that a future battle is going to be unimaginable. It's going to be worse than anything you could have ever imagined that happened between the nations. And from our 21st century perspective, when we think about what happened in World War I and in World War II And I mean, we could name some other atrocious activities, right? Cambodia, whatever, Khmer Rouge, we all remember those stories. Can it get worse than that? Yeah. But at that time, your people shall be delivered. Not every one of them, but the ones who are written in the book. And who are they? Well, they are the wise in verse 3. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky. Some will be raised to death, and some will be raised to life. And so in verse 2, we have this apparent resurrection language. And here's where the debate again gets really strong. Some see that language in verse 2 as literally talking about the resurrection, when Jesus comes again, kind of resurrection. The good dead will be raised and the bad dead will be raised. One raised to life, one raised to death. Others see it as more a reflection of resurrection language or restoration language, like Ezekiel 37. That is the valley of dry bones. In Ezekiel 37, that valley of dry bones, and put the flesh on them, raise them up again. That's not about resurrection at the end of time. That's about Israel being restored. That's about exile ending. And maybe that's what Daniel's talking about. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Maybe he's talking about both in some sense. I don't know. But the point is that the people of God are going to be persecuted, and the persecution will end. And the way God is going to look at that is he's going to see those who are wise and those who are foolish. Those who are wise, who maintain loyalty to the covenant of God, who maintained a relationship with God's covenant, and those who did not. Those who played the game of the empires, those who played the game of the evil ruler, they're going to be raised to death. Those who remain faithful to God, lived wisely before the rulers, and resisted the powers, they're going to be raised to life. And if you think about it in the context of Antiochus, there was a rebellion that won, right? They defeated the occupiers. Maybe that's what he's talking about. I don't know. But notice in verse 4, evil shall increase. Okay, we ended this persecution, but that's not necessarily the last one. Right? We end one persecution, there's another coming. Because the powers are still at play. Yeah.
Do we know what year Daniel was written in?
Well, that's a big debate. Now, Daniel himself lived in, like 605 to 530s BC. Daniel, as a historical person, when was it written? When was this book written down? Some would say during Daniel's lifetime. Others would say, no, it wasn't written down for several hundred years later. And there's a huge debate about that. I haven't tried to settle that debate. But it does play into how you read Daniel, for sure, when you think it was written. Because you get this point about Daniel sealing things and putting it aside. This isn't going to happen for a while, so seal it up. It's authenticated, it's real, but it's not going to happen just yet. And if Daniel's living in the 500s, and Antiochus happens in the 100s, it's 400 years. Or if it's that future thing that's still future to us, it's 2,500 years or more, right? So the prophecy is not immediate. Right? But let's kind of wrap this up here. We get that language of the end again in verses 5 and following. This is kind of the epilogue, or the kind of the conclusion of the book of Daniel, is verses 5 and following. And as Daniel sees two more figures, two more angelic figures. And one of them said to the other one, which is kind of a strange thing, and just think about it. One of these angelic figures says to the other angelic figure, notice in verse 6, how long shall it be until the end of these wonders? It's like two angels talking. Daniel's overhearing them. How long is this going to happen? How long is this going to last? One angel knows and one angel doesn't. Right? Or maybe it's just a rhetorical device to say, here's something we want to talk about. And one of them says, in verse 7, that it would be for a time, 2 times, and half a time. And then in verse 9, talking about Daniel keeping this sealed to the time of the end. But if in verse 11, it's 1,290 days. And then in verse 12, it's 1,335 days. And you're going, and I'm going, what in the world are you talking about?
When does it start?
Yeah,
When
what?
does the day start?
Yeah, when do they start? When do they end? Are these symbolic numbers? Are these literal numbers? What does time, times, and a half mean? We had that back in chapter 7, time, times, and a half, which people seem to think is like more than like 3.5. And if you take 3.5 years, then that's 1,290 days. This is where people get the idea of 7-year tribulation period. And that there's like 3.5 years of good time and 3.5 years of bad time. So it's going to end after the 3.5 years of bad time. Why 1,290 and then 1,335? It's not even the same amount of time. I don't know. I don't know. It's some kind of difference in difference in beginning or ending. One includes more than the other. Why? I'm not sure. But a lot of speculation about that. But in verse 11, notice that the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up, that's that 3.5 years. For 3.5 years, the sacrifices cease and the abomination desolates. And we know that happened during Antiochus. We know that's exactly what Antiochus did for 3.5 years. So I still think he's probably talking about Antiochus. But again, it's not just Antiochus as if Antiochus is the only manifestation of this. Antiochus is just one example of what happens over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And that's why the people of God have to watch. And we have to look for the signs of that evil in our world and anticipate even the rise of evil. Not be surprised by it. We're not surprised by the rise of evil. We might say, well, look at the evil that's in the world, and we can be shocked by that. At one level, yeah, we're shocked by school shootings. That's a shock. For people of faith, for people who live in covenant with God, it's unimaginable that someone would take a gun, go in and shoot up a school. That just makes no sense to us. But at another level, we're not shocked by the evil in the world. Evil happens, and it happens regularly. Are there things we can do about that? Yeah, I think, we respond to evil. We should respond to evil. And at the same time, evil has its own power, and it will continue. And as Daniel said here, the text says up in verse 4, and evil shall increase. It's going to get bigger in different ways. We can see that in the 20th century, right? 75 million people killed in World War II? 75 million. Technology allowed them to do that. Couldn't even imagine that in Daniel's time, that many people would be killed. Weren't that many people on the planet, probably, in Daniel's time. I don't know that for sure. I don't know about that, but evil shall increase. But I want to end us with Daniel here in verse 13. We can debate all the speculation about who is he talking about, and, is it some Antichrist figure in the future? Could be, not denying that. I don't think it's that, but I could be wrong. But verse 13 is where I want us to end our study of Daniel. Now in verse 9, the angel says, Daniel, go your way, for the words are to remain secret and sealed until the time of the end. Go your way. And he says that again in verse 13. But you, Daniel, go your way. It's the same word. Anybody got a different translation of that? Go your way. Is that what everybody says? What do you think he's talking about? Go your way. In fact, yeah, go ahead, somebody.
Live the rest of your life. Enjoy the rest of your time.
Okay, yeah. Live your life. Go your way. Walk. It's really the word walk as well. You can translate it walk. Walk your way. Go your way. Live your life. And why would you say that to Daniel? Yeah, just go live your life. But what was Daniel's reaction to the appearance of the vision back in chapter 10? Remember his reaction? Filled with fear. Just trembling, shaking, falling to the ground, overcome with fear. Now, when you hear a word like evil will increase, and the people of God will be persecuted, fear is probably a pretty natural response. All right. What am I going to do with that? And the angel says to him twice, go your way. Live your life, walk your way, walk your life out. I think it's also a kind of, don't live in fear.
God's in control.
Yeah, God's in control. God's going to deal with evil. But the people of God are going to hurt. The people of God are going to get killed, and they're going to be martyrs. And the empires are not going to support the people of God. Right? But go your way. Live your life. And I think the implicit thing is live your life without fear. This is kind of the response. Remember, the angel said, don't be afraid. And I think this is kind of the ending of Daniel's, don't be afraid. Live your life. Yeah, a lot of bad stuff is going on. But trust God with that. Because when the end comes, whatever that end is, there's going to be an end to the persecution. There's going to be an end to the oppressors and to the persecutors. Then he says, and rest. Now here's a debate. Anybody got a different word than rest? Everybody got rest in their translation. Verse 13. Rest. Some, in fact, probably most interpreters would say rest there is sleep. Like sleep and death. Live your life and die. Rest. Because he talked about sleeping in verse 2, right? Those who are sleeping. Or is it 3? In there somewhere. So he's saying to Daniel, live your life. Rest in death. But be assured that God has not forgotten you. And you will rise. So the word rise is the same word that referred to the angel in Michael in chapter 12, verse 1. That the angel arose, right? He arose. He stood. In other words, the rising here is a vindication, a kind of accomplishment for the people of God. It may refer to Daniel's own resurrection, possible. But I think if we step back from that verse and we read it at a larger level, and more 30,000-foot level, it's a word not only to Daniel, it's a word to all of us. It's similar to the word that we have in Revelation, when I've cited here, Revelation 13:10, Revelation 14:12, says this calls for perseverance on the part of the saints. This calls for endurance on the part of the saints. The saints are going to go through rough times. It's going to get bad. But live your life, rest, and God will cause you to rise. Mm-hmm. So when we contemplate and we speculate about what's happening in the world today, and some think the Antichrist is right around the corner, or they even identify the Antichrist. Back in the 70s, it was, or in the late 70s, early 80s, it was the Ayatollah of Iran. Right? He was the Antichrist. And so we're always Christians have a tendency to always say, well, maybe that's him. Maybe that's him, and speculate. And I don't know that we can do that. We can look for signs of evil, and we can say, well, that's evil. What that ruler's doing is evil. All right? We can name that, and we should. But can we say, oh, that's it? That's the one? No, I'd be careful about that. But what we can do is take the word of the angel to Daniel and say, live your life. Live your life recognizing evil abounds, but live your life without fear. Live your life in confidence of who God is, and that God is orchestrating, or God is engaged, and God is involved, and God has not forgotten. Live your life and rest. Rest in death even, but rest. Because God will arise and cause you to rise, right?
And Matthew talked about that in Matthew 11, where Jesus said, come to me and I'll give you rest.
Yeah. Jesus says, come to me, I'll give you rest, right? Exactly. Rest is a key theme in the history of Israel. God brought them into the land to rest. Right? God gave them rest from their enemies. Or there's the rest in sleep, or the rest in death. All those are images in the Hebrew Bible. So it's a peaceful image. It's not a violent image. Even if it's about death, rest, it's not a violent image. It's rather a peaceful one. Live your life, rest, and God will cause you to rise. Right? That's how we live in an evil world. We live our life without fear. We trust in the rest that God will give us and how God will cause us to rise. And we see it in the story of Jesus, right? Isn't that the story of Jesus? He lived a life without fear. He rested in death. And he arose. Maybe that's what the angel's telling Daniel. That's what God has in mind for humanity, for those who are obedient unto death. I think that's a nice place to end in Daniel. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there's going to be the Antichrist. I don't know if that person's around the corner. I don't know. But I'm not afraid. I'm going to live my life. And God will give me rest. And then God will cause me to rise. Not just me, but the people of God. Right? Just like God did for Israel over and over again, and did for Jesus, the Messiah, and will do for the church over and over again. So don't be afraid. Rest. And God will cause you to rise. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.